Hi everyone, and welcome back to my channel. This is the first video I'm going to be doing that is of this nature, and I'm a little bit nervous to tell you the truth because I don't know how well I'm going to be able to do a video like this. I've been obsessed with true crime for years and years now. I read books, I read many books on it, I watch endless YouTube videos on it. This is what led me to watching YouTube, and I hope you guys find this video informative. So today we're going to be talking about the case of Sheryl Ann Tillinghast. Sheryl Ann Tillinghast was born on April 16th, 1956, and she was only 17 when she was last seen. She went missing on September 24th, 1973 from Wasik, New York. Sheryl was from Phelps, New York, and was the third oldest of 8 children. She lived in Phelps, New York in a mobile home with her 7 other siblings. I'm guessing maybe the couple older ones had moved out. I'm not quite sure about that. And her mother. So that is a lot of people to be living in a smaller residence. Now, Sheryl and her mother Gertrude had a very turbulent relationship, as Gertrude was not only an alcoholic, but she was known to get abusive with the children as well. Now, Sheryl tried to keep the atmosphere at home as peaceful as possible for her younger siblings and was really known to be a caretaker, someone who would just really be there, a motherly figure, and who loved all of her siblings very much. However, Sheryl didn't go missing from Phelps, New York. She went missing from Wasik. I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing all these names wrong. I am very sorry. New York. And the reason why is because at the time of her disappearance, Sheryl was not living at home. She had pled guilty in January 1973 of having a small amount of marijuana on her. So when she pled guilty to that charge, she was then sent to a boarding school. I'm not sure how long she was there before this happened, but the boarding school actually caught fire. Now, I've read reports that said the boarding school burnt down. I've read reports that said just there was a fire. And I also read reports saying that Sheryl Ann lost all of her belongings in this fire. What is the 100% accurate truth? I'm not sure, but we just know that there is a fire, and this fire was significant enough to cause Sheryl to have to be transferred out of that school and go to the Wasik State School. Now, this school was for kids that had a lot of behavioral problems and stuff like that. I would like to also note that this school was for people that were experiencing behavioral problems as well as people who had special mental disabilities and stuff like that. As I'm sure you've noticed, the school also consisted of more than one building. There were multiple buildings on the school campus as well as a graveyard. Now, it is said that this school sits on top of a hill and is rather isolated from the rest of the town. Currently, the school is only partially open. Some of the buildings are used for offices, but there are no students there, and it no longer has residents on campus. So after her graduation from Wasik State School, Sheryl decided that she wasn't going to return home, and even though she was only 17, she decided that it was better for her to not be in that environment due to her and her mother's relationship. So Sheryl accepted a job at the school's laundry facility and got an apartment on school grounds. So Sheryl lived close by and stayed working at the Wasik State School in the laundry. Even though Sheryl was living away from home, she continued to stay in touch with her family and especially her siblings. She would write home every other week. From what I read, Sheryl had even contacted law enforcement asking them to do a welfare check on her siblings as she was concerned about their living conditions and how they were being treated at home. During her time at Wasik State School, Sheryl began dating an older man. Now, it is unknown how old he was. It is unknown his name. I can't find that anywhere. Maybe I missed it. I'm not sure. However, he did work in the laundry facility, so it is speculated they met there. While Sheryl and this man were dating, the counselor at the school noticed that Sheryl had a lot of bruises on her body and suspected that she was involved in some type of domestic violence in her relationship. While the counselor did notice these marks on Sheryl's body, it is unknown if she ever confronted Sheryl on it or approached her and tried to talk to her about the situation and what was really going on in her life. But we can be fairly certain that Cheryl was suffering from some abuse in that relationship, because on the early morning of August 29th, 1973, Cheryl called police and asked them to come arrest her boyfriend because he had assaulted her. The police did come within the following hours, and they did arrest him, and he was arraigned in court. However, shortly after, a relative of his posted his bail and he was free to go. A trial was scheduled for sometime in October 1973. However, by the time that trial would roll around, Cheryl would already be missing, so nothing really ever became of it. Cheryl's boyfriend at that time is still a suspect in this case. However, he has since passed away, so this is no longer a viable lead. Shortly before Cheryl disappeared, she had written a letter home to one of her siblings, which, as I mentioned earlier, was not unusual at all. She was very known for keeping in touch and writing letters home. And in this letter, she had talked to her sibling, to said sibling, about the fact that she had just gotten her own car, and she even discussed moving to California with said sibling. In the letter, Cheryl also stated that she was going to come home soon for her mother's birthday celebration and that she would see everyone then. Unfortunately, that was the last time they would hear from Sheryl Ann. Despite their strained mother-daughter relationship, when Cheryl was not showing up for her mother's birthday celebration, her mother became increasingly worried, as it was unlike Cheryl to say she would be there and not be there. So her mother decided to contact the Wasik State School where Cheryl worked, and just to see, maybe, was she working? Did they know where she was? Did they have anything that they could tell her? And when Gertrude called and explained to the school that Cheryl did not come home and she was wondering where she was and if she was there, the school simply said that Cheryl was an adult and she did not have to come home if she did not want to. Considering that bluntly put statement from the school and the strained mother-daughter relationship they had, Gertrude decided that that must just be it, that Cheryl did not want to come home and she was off doing her own thing, and that she was just going to let it go. And unfortunately, Cheryl was never reported missing. Sheryl Ann's sister, Laura Hinckley, said in an interview with 2020 that she and her other siblings were actually afraid to go against their mother's wishes because of their mother's abusive nature. And because Cheryl and their mother Gertrude's relationship history, that she and her other siblings really had no reason to question why Cheryl didn't come home much further, and they just kind of left it at that. Hinckley was only 9 at the time of her sister's disappearance, and even though she could tell that her mother wasn't really actively looking for Cheryl, she still assumed that either her mother or the school had reported Cheryl missing. However, no one ever did. Sheryl Ann Tillinghast really did go missing without a trace. Now, I read through tons of articles and I looked and searched and I could not come up with a date or any other details about this, but it is stated in many articles that once she disappeared, her apartment was looked through and nothing was amiss. All of her belongings were there, all of her important possessions were there, and even 2 uncashed paychecks totaling over $150 were left in her apartment. Now, $150 might not sound like a lot, but we have to consider this was back in 1973, and compared to today's dollar and today's economy, that would be equal to around $800. And regardless of the amount of money, if someone is going to run away, if someone is going to leave their life behind, then you would think they would take every dollar they had. In 1998, 25 years after Cheryl was last seen, Hinckley and her siblings would discover, accidentally so, that Cheryl was never reported missing. And this happened when unidentified female remains were discovered in Chester County, New Hampshire. The New Hampshire Sheriff Department came across a civilian report in New York of a missing Sheryl Tillinghast, and they felt that these unidentified female remains that they had discovered could possibly be a match to Cheryl. While the remains were not a match to Cheryl, this did get her siblings and law enforcement wondering whatever did happen to Cheryl, and without this, they still to this day may have not realized that Cheryl was never reported missing. So even though the remains didn't match, it still was a great discovery in terms that now the family knew that she was never reported missing. Now law enforcement knew that she was still in fact missing, and they could begin this search. The case was taken on by the state police. However, this was 25 years later, and there had been a lot of time that had passed. 25 years is a lot of time to try to rewind and to go back and to figure out what may or may not have happened to someone. Investigators really tried to jump on this case and really get the ball moving and try to make some type of headway. They even went as far as to just go ahead and walk around and knock on the doors to people that lived close to Cheryl when she lived in downstate New York, and unfortunately they obtained no leads and no solid clues. On top of all Cheryl's belongings and 2 uncashed paychecks being left at her apartment, there's also been no activity on her social security number or any DMV records. Sheryl Ann Tillinghast is classified as endangered missing. She was born on April 16th, 1956, and she was last seen September 24th, 1973. When she went missing, Cheryl was 5'3", 140 pounds. She had brown hair and brown eyes, no distinguishing characteristics or features, and she went missing from Wasik, New York. Police do have Cheryl's fingerprints and DNA. Cheryl's sister, Laura, says that she does not believe for a second that Cheryl would have up and just left her siblings, that Cheryl loved them, and that she was a motherly figure to them. She was a caretaker to them. She would bake cookies with them, she would play with them, and she just really tried to keep a normal balance of life at home for her younger siblings. And she strongly believes that Cheryl did not leave on her own free will. I am now going to read a quote from Cheryl's younger sister, Laura Hinckley. "I always had a feeling something really bad happened to her. She would at least try to get in touch with her siblings because she loved us very much. There's no way she would have just left." And that seems to be the most popular belief, that Cheryl would not leave on her own. She cared just too much about her siblings, and she would not just disappear without a word. And so when it comes to theories, there's really not many, unfortunately. I guess you can really kind of narrow it down to 2, from what I have researched at least. First theory is that Cheryl left on her own. Now, we know that Cheryl and her mother did not have a good relationship, and she did not have the idealistic family life. We also know that she was living on her own and that she had gotten involved in a relationship with a man who supposedly was abusive to her. We also can take into account that the last letter she wrote home to one of her siblings stated that she had gotten a car, which I might add that that car has never been proven, and a lot of people think it might have just kind of been a tall tale or just something Cheryl said in the letter, and that she might have never actually had a car. However, we can't totally dismiss the fact that Cheryl might have obtained a car, and maybe she decided to take that car, and in that letter, not only did she mention the car, but she mentioned moving to California. I guess it's at least fair to consider that Cheryl might have took her car and left and went to California to start a new life. I find this theory doubtful though, because of the fact that she left 2 uncashed paychecks as well as all of her belongings. I mean, if you were going to move and start a new life somewhere, don't you think that you would at least take most of your money? I mean, she would have had to pay for gas, she would have had to eat, she would have had to board somewhere, and when she got to her destination, she would have had to have a place to stay, a place to live. So it doesn't make sense to me that someone would decide to pick up and go and leave all of their belongings and uncashed paychecks. So I myself don't put much into this theory. The second and probably the most agreed upon theory is that the man she was dating at the time did something horrible to Cheryl. Now, we know from the school counselor that Cheryl was seen with a lot of bruises on her, and if that wasn't enough, Cheryl herself had made a call to the police claiming that she had been assaulted by this man, and he was arrested. So the police obviously found evidence that Cheryl was telling the truth when she made that report. And with these facts being stated, it seems to me like this case is kind of pointing a lot towards this man. However, it is so unfortunate that no one reported Cheryl missing, because if Cheryl would have been reported missing at the time of her disappearance, they could have interviewed this man, they could have investigated him, they could have just had so many more leads and so many more clues. However, 25 years later, when it was finally discovered that Cheryl was never reported, this man was deceased. So now that kind of puts a big halt in this investigation. If you have any information or tips on what may have happened to Sheryl Ann Tillinghast, please call New York State Police tip line at 1-866-723-3697. I feel very sad about this case because I feel like so many people, unknowingly so, failed Sheryl, because she should have been reported missing by all accounts. If they went into her apartment because she wasn't around and they found all of her belongings and all of her possessions, how could she not be reported by the school, by her mother, by her boyfriend? That's another thing that kind of makes the boyfriend look suspect, because don't you think he would have reported his girlfriend if she just disappeared one day? However, this is all information that I just gathered from reading articles and doing research on the internet, and I am sorry if I got anything wrong, and I'm sorry for my mispronunciation of names and places. I just wanted to spread this story a little bit. It has been 45 years since Sheryl was last seen, but you never know who may know something. And with that being said, I hope I was able to inform you guys a little bit on the disappearance of Sheryl Ann Tillinghast, and I want to thank you all for watching so much, and take care. Thank you. Bye-bye.